What is it? What is it that it's so fascinating about planes that disappear? I previously made a video about the Bermuda Triangle on one of my other channels. Not sure if you guys have seen it, but there's just something fascinating about it, isn't there? It's kind of definitely a morbid fascination because it's like, welcome to that plane. 300 people or whatever on it just disappeared. The Malaysian Airlines one famously. There's one of the big Twitter posts that I remember and it sticks with me as being so dark was after the Malaysian Airlines flight disappeared. There was another one that was shot down over Russia or Chechnya or something, but it was shot down like 6 months later and everyone on board died. And there was a Twitter picture, an Instagram photo from a guy traveling on the plane at the airport, and he's doing a selfie with the plane in the background, being like, there it is. That's what it took for what to look for in case it disappears. And then the plane was shot down. It's like, oh my God, this is just one of those super morbid things. It was just a young dude too. And you're like, oh my God, such a fucking horrible situation. But hey, that's a brilliant start to the episode. Let's just get into it, shall we? Excuse me. This one's a pretty good mystery, as there are a few different things going on that all end up leading to big fat question marks. It also feels like one of those things that can actually be solved, although there is, of course, the shadow of conspiracy theory, which would mean never finding out what really happened. Wouldn't be a good Dead Reckoning episode if there wasn't a conspiracy or aliens thrown in, now would there? Uh, Excuse me, it's Monday morning. This is the first thing I'm recording all week. My mouth is still warming up. I never quite know how much to give away in these introductions, but this story involves a plane crash where the crash itself is a mystery. Suspiciously stymied recovery operations, no bodies, and a missing black box that could answer the questions about the entire event. In fact, pretty much the only things definitively recovered from the crash site are a load of smuggled caiman skins. Excuse me. Now, is it terrible that I've... Let's all explore the unknowns surrounding Eastern Airlines Flight 980. And boy, are there some unknowns going on here. On New Year's Day in 1985, Eastern Airlines Flight 980 was coming in for a landing at El Alto International Airport in La Paz, Bolivia. El Alto is one of the highest airports in the world, so it's got an extra long runway to account for the extra speed that a plane has to carry to successfully land at higher altitudes than normal. The pilot for Flight 980 was Larry Campbell, but he was inexperienced with landing at altitude. This only being his second time flying into El Alto. Wait, he's the captain? Shouldn't he be like the co-pilot flying into that airport a few times before he's doing it? Like, as the actual captain? With about 10 minutes until the anticipated landing, the pilot was cleared to descend 18,000 feet. What happened next has never been fully explained, but the result was the Boeing 727 flew straight into the backside of Mountain I'm going to butcher this name, Illimani, shattering the plane and killing everyone on board. While the plane could hold only 100 passengers when full, there were only 19 passengers and 10 crew on Flight 980's class journey. It is weird when you're on an empty plane. I was once on a plane. It was a giant A380 out of somewhere, which is the double-decker passenger plane. And I swear to God, there was maybe 4 or 5 extra other people in the economy. I was just walking around the plane. It was there was nobody here on this big-ass airplane. It was I think it was a 6-hour flight going to DC, I think, or something like that. And it was empty. While survivors were never really anticipated, the search and recovery missions carried out in the wake of the crash ranged from slightly suspicious to almost a joke. The Bolivian Air Force managed to find the main crash site from the air the following day, but the incident team couldn't make it up the mountain due to bad weather and avalanches, which, yes, does seem like a valid reason to wait a while. As it was a U.S. Aircraft that went down, the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, assembled a team to investigate the accident and to track down the infamous black boxes. These are the flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders, both of which are extremely useful, if not essential, in working out why and how the plane managed to crash into the mountain. This is so when a domestic plane or a plane from a certain country crashes in another country, surely it's down to the local authorities to do the investigation rather than the home country, because that's who has the authority over that territory. Like if a American plane crashes in an enemy country or whatever, or a country they don't have diplomatic relations, well, in that case, I guess it's got to be done by just diplomacy. Be like, yeah, we'll let the NTSB in, Bolivia says, rather than like some other country. No chance. We investigated ourselves and we found out we absolutely did not shoot down that plane. It was a fuel explosion. The videos on social media of that missile heading towards it wasn't a missile. Unfortunately, none of the climbers or investigators rapidly assembled by the NTSB managed to get acclimated to the high altitude in Bolivia and were all too ill to make the climb. ALPA, or the Airline Pilots Association, also tried to send the team up the mountain, but were unable to for the same reason: altitude sickness and just the general lack of preparedness. The U.S. then asked neighboring Peru if they could borrow a high altitude helicopter to fly up the mountain, but because of pettiness and trying to avoid looking inadequate, Bolivia got the hump and wouldn't allow the helicopter in. Eventually, though, it got over itself and permission for the helicopter to fly up to the crash site was granted. In a scheme that seems like something Pierce Brosnan and James Bond would do, as we all know, the best James Bond, ALPA chairman Bud Lupke decided that he'd jump out of the helicopter at 21,000 feet, then ski back down the mountain. Freaking legend. Here's the chairman of this organization. Also, I feel like me saying that Pierce Brosnan is the best Bond kind of dates me. Like, I feel anytime that someone says, oh, that's my Bond, he's my favorite Bond, it's just like, says what James Bond you grew up with. Because I think generally everyone prefers Daniel Craig, right? I mean, that's the general consensus among critics and whatnot. But I grew up with Pierce Brosnan, and in my mind, he's what Bond looks like. I mean, I didn't literally grow up with him. That'd be kind of weird. But I grew up with him playing James Bond. I don't really know what he hoped to achieve by this. Maybe the altitude sickness wasn't affecting his critical thinking. Number one, the helicopter can't get too near the mountain or crash, so he's got a high possibility of injuring himself when jumping out. Number two, if he managed to find the recorders, how is he proposing on getting them down the mountain? They weigh about 10 pounds or 4.5 kilograms, so presumably they'd have been a bit bulkier in the mid-80s. He might have needed tools to retrieve them and secure them to himself, and at altitude, that's a lot of work. And number three, the skiing down idea was stupid as the terrain was rocky. The weather had been bad and avalanches had stopped Bolivians sending anyone up earlier. Maybe a midlife crisis was the real inspiration here. Luckily, his foolhardy stunt was put to bed when he discovered that the high altitude helicopter wasn't high altitude enough, and it wouldn't be able to hover in the thin air at 21,000 feet. You're the head of the Pilots Association. How do you not know this? Or just at least look into it a little? Or ask someone who's got a helicopter to be like, can it happen? Be like, no. What are you doing? Do you even know how to ski, Bob? Good news. We don't care. Another helicopter was requested for the mission from U.S.-based Sikorsky Aircraft, which is now part of Lockheed Martin. This experimental high-altitude helicopter was sent to Bolivia in pieces to be assembled there. But you guessed it, the engineers sent to put it together were too altitude sick to do anything for several days. Of course, I know that altitude sickness is a real thing and it affects everyone differently, but man, these Americans are really taking this lack of oxygen hard. But it does affect different people differently. Anyway, helicopter finally working, they did manage to fly it up the mountain, but they missed their window and the weather was now too bad to let anyone out there. This is a bit of a joke, isn't it? The helicopter is only on loan for about a week. So that was the end of that attempt. You're the US government. Just borrow it for another week. You've got basically unlimited money by this point. You might be thinking, what the heck? Just get some Bolivian climbers up there again. They're already acclimated and they're ready to go. When in actual fact, before all these false starts, someone quietly made it to the crash site a mere 2 days after the crash. Fernando Garach, who was, yes, a Bolivian climber, made it up to the wreck site. if I was a Bolivian climber and they're like, "Do you want to go up and see that plane crash?" My first question to ask is anyone alive? I'd be like, the chances are basically zero. And I'd be like, then no, it's not my job. I have no desire to go up there and see all those mangled bodies and bits of clothing flying around the place. Because that is, honestly, I didn't sign up for that, did I? I know someone's got to do it. I know it's not nice, but it ain't me. It was unclear at this time on whose behalf he made the hike, lending more credence to the increased cries of a cover up. His report of what he discovered was also hushed up. He later stated that officials had threatened him, and he wasn't mentioned in Bolivia's official report of the accident. There are no pictures of the site from his trek, although I think that's because he didn't take any camera equipment, as opposed to them being suppressed. Peter Frickwright, in a piece for OutsideOnline.com, managed to catch up with the guy around 2006 and got more of a fuller picture from him. He also has a more immediate connection with the story, which we'll come to a bit later on. Before writing this, I'd actually never heard of OutsideOnline.com before, but it is a big, you want to call it, conspiracy theory site. Excuse me. So, according to all this information, what Garage did find in 1985 was plane debris, open suitcases, a lot of caiman skins, but no human bodies and no flight recorders. Garach and the other two climbers with him couldn't stay at the site for too long as they had no supplies. There was no way to drop any more, seeing as how Bud Upke was prevented from his Bond-style shenanigans by the be just logically or logistically impossible in every way. So they had to come down the next day. This is where the military picked them up, interrogated, and threatened them, and made an official report stating that no bodies or blood had been found at the scene. So Garage told Frickwright that he had seen blood at the site. He was just too afraid of the interrogators to disagree with their narrative. So while this was a successful expedition in some respects, we still didn't learn much from it, as no flight recorders were found. A few subsequent treks have been made to the site, one of which included the widow of William Kelly, who died on the flight. Judith Kelly did things the right way, taking her time to acclimate to the higher altitude before beginning her climb in July 1985. She took letters that she had written for her husband, as well as letters from other family members of the victims, and buried them at the site. By now, the remains of the plane had started descending the mountain on their own accord. Flight 980 hit the top of the mountain, and since then, pieces have been sliding down in snow and ice falls. So it stood until 2016. So, yeah, we were still none the wiser as to the circumstances surrounding the plane crash. The official report from the U.S. side of things gave their verdict as controlled flight into the terrain, which tells us what happened. The plane flew into a mountain, but not why or how. And what happened in 2016 then? Well, adventurous ex-soldier Dan Futrell found out about Flight 980 and its missing black box. He decided to find it for himself, along with his roommate Isaac Stoner. Great name. The pair started training for the challenge by sleeping in special altitude tents and running up and down a lot of stairs. Shortly before their expedition, word got out. Peter Frickwright, who I mentioned before, he joined the party. Even with their hypoxic tent training, the climb was still arduous and hard. But with a lucky break in the weather, the team made it to the crash site, which was more exposed than it had ever been. Well, it wasn't really the original crash site anymore, as everything had been falling down the mountain for 30 years, but they had reached the debris field of Flight 980. Thanks to a steep drop in the mountain, a lot of the plane debris is now almost 3,000 feet lower than a smaller field higher up. Almost immediately, they found a human femur, which totally undermined the no bodies aspect of the story. Over the course of their first search, they found another part of a leg bone and a piece of a spine. In total, there were 6 instances of human remains, according to Dan's blog about their trip. While that is proof that people died, it's still not enough to account for 29 people. He says that the area they searched was about 1 mile by 0.7 miles or 1.6 by 1.2 kilometers. They found many plane parts, shoes, clothes, and a lot of caiman skins. But not the black boxes they were after. These skins are going to confuse the fuck out of future archaeologists. They'll be like, how did these caimans get to the top of a mountain? And where are their bones? Where's their flesh? Why is it just the skin? Even though they're called black boxes, the flight recorders are usually housed in a bright orange case to make it easy to find them in situations such as this. Futtrell and his team did find scraps of orange metal, which they thought might be parts of the casing. But these boxes are supposed to be almost indestructible, so finding scraps and twisty bits of orange metal didn't bode that well for finding anything usefully salvageable. On the final day of their search, Isaac Stoner found a metal piece with wiring that had an abbreviation for a cockpit voice recorder on it. But that was it. There wasn't anything else attached to it. Nearby, however, was some tape that they fervently hoped was part of the recording device. Once they got home, they tried to send the samples of orange metal and the tape to the NTSB for analysis. But, as Peter Frickwright's article said, they had inadvertently violated Annex 13 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation. The evidence should have remained in Bolivia, as that's where the crash happened. After months of trying to contact anyone in Bolivia about this, Patrol finally got permission from Bolivian officials that the NTSB could investigate the pieces. Well, that kind of points away from a cover-up, unless they're all in Bolivia, absolutely certain they got everything. And this is just some, musical tape that was in someone's luggage. And what were the results? Well, as the title of this episode may suggest, they were not what anyone was hoping for. In February 2017, the NTSB released the findings of the fragments taken from the crash site. And here's part of their report. Quoted, the materials provided to the NTSB consisted of several metal fragments, one damaged spool of magnetic tape, and two additional off-spool sections of magnetic tape. Examination of the materials revealed no identifiable specific serial numbers. One metal piece was identified as a cockpit voice recorder rack. Other metal pieces were consistent with parts related to the flight data recorder, pressurized container assembly. So, we finally have proof of part of a recorder. So what was on the tape? Well, this is what the NTSB found. The magnetic tape on the spool was 13.25-inch U-matic videotape, and when reviewed, it was found to contain an 18-minute recording of the Trial by Treehouse episode of the television series I Spy, dubbed into Spanish. So either this is definitely there is a hell of a coincidence, like some device just happens to use the same stuff as a flight data recorder, or that was somewhere else in the flight and it got close to the data recorder, so they put them together as being, oh, this must be from this. It's definitely more plausible, or someone from Bolivia grabbed some tape, went up there, got the real recording, grabbed it, put the fake tape at the site, though it was damaged enough, but oh no. Future restoration techniques managed to fix it, and we're done with it. I have to say, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but this is seemingly pretty goddamn suspicious, isn't it? Bolivia, isn't it? I'm gonna get interrogated and killed off of this episode. Presumably, this was part of the in-flight entertainment. While he was obviously pretty gutted about it, Futtrell seems optimistic on his blog that all the correct tapes are still out there, probably close to where they were looking, just waiting to be found. Is it so obvious that that's just part of the in-flight entertainment, or is it? I don't know. It does seem pretty suspicious that they were right next to each other, or nearby it. So we could say it was just nearby. I guess they could be close to each other on the plane. I'm kind of coming around to this not being a conspiracy, which is weird for me because usually it's the other way around. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I crazy? Suspicious, right? Are you going crazy? And now we're a few further years on with not much more information than we had at the start. So, the big question of this episode is, why did the plane crash? How could a passenger plane that was supposedly on course for El Alto Airport end up crashing into a mountain? There are a few factors that play into this, but without the flight data recorders, we can't know 100% what really happened. We already know, thanks to me mentioning altitude sickness about 100 times, that the airport was way higher up than most other airports anywhere in the world. Pilots are supposed to wear oxygen masks on approach and all the way to the gate, so they're not affected by the change in altitude. Wow. You got to do that all the way to the gates? Like, geez, that seems a little extreme. Oxygen masks on approach and all the way to the gate? That doesn't. When a plane's in the air, it's a pressurized cabin, so obviously the pilots are not affected by the lack of altitude. So I guess it's just out of an abundance of caution in case there's a depressurization just as the plane is coming in. So they wear the oxygen masks just in case that happens, which seems, extra super safe. So I guess this is going to push us into the theory that they didn't bother because they were like, oh, this is ridiculous. It's a pressurized cabin. If something happens, we'll put the masks on. And then the cabin did depressurize. They lost consciousness or the ability to operate the aircraft properly, which happens incredibly quickly, and they didn't put their oxygen masks on, and they crashed the plane. Possible. The pilot on Flight 980 was only making his second landing at the airport, so did something go wrong with him? Well, even if he became ill or something, there was another pilot right next to him, and there was also a flight engineer hanging out in first class. If there had been any sign of an issue, he'd be the first one trying to help out. Although, interestingly, the Boeing 727 had a three-person cockpit, meaning that the engineer really should have been with the pilots during the flight. He's like, guys, you all right? Do I need to engineer anything right now? They're like, no. He's like, because there's a lie flat bed waiting for me in first class and a glass of champagne. So I'll be back there. You guys have a good time. Probably wouldn't be drinking. Honestly. At least they definitely wouldn't be drinking. At 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the plane was in touch with ground control in La Paz and seemed on track, flying at 20,000 feet. They had been given the all clear to descend to 18,000 feet. But shortly after that, the plane hit the mountain. Communications went dead. It should be noted that there was no radar at El Alto Airport, and ground control couldn't really help pilots all that much, as the equipment they did have wasn't the best. Instead, the cockpit crew of the planes had to work out the navigation more or less for themselves. The weather was bad, which hardly helped matters, so are all these factors adding up to pilot error and a very unfortunate accident? Probably. The Bureau of Aircraft Accidents Archive states, quote, the crew deviated from the prescribed route, apparently to avoid bad weather. When at an altitude of 19,600 feet, the aircraft struck the slope of Mount Nevado, located 43 kilometers southwest of runway 28. Aircraft disintegrated on impact, and all 28 occupants were killed. The probable cause was given as, quote, controlled flight into terrain after the crew failed to realize his altitude and path were incorrect while cruising in limited visibility due to the night and clouds up above up to 9,000 meters. There might have been technical problems going on inside the plane, which added to their woes. But again, without the data recorders, we can't know for sure. There are other theories, though. This is the Dead Reckoning show, after all. It would be boring if it was just an open and shut case. Well, it's definitely not an open and shut case, because it's like, where did those flight recorders go? And why was everyone not cooperating? That's extremely weird. There's definitely something going on. It's like one of those things where it's like, I don't know what the conspiracy theory is, but it's like something isn't right. Because there's plenty of other plane crashes where it's just like everything's recovered, it's open and shut, we know what happened, and the report comes out when it comes out. So what's going on here is suspicious. So was it a bomb? A mid-air explosion, which then launched the plane into the mountain? Might explain a few of the details of the case. In 2014, a former Eastern Airlines pilot, George Nolly, published a book called Final Destination Disaster. They might want to, probably should have workshopped the title a little bit more. Anyways, Nolly creates the case for a bomb having been on board, pointing to how this would have depressurized the plane, either blowing apart the people inside or sucking their bodies out, to land all over the place in quite a distance from where the plane eventually hit. If you follow this train of thought, it covers another point as well. Depending on where the bomb was, it might also have blown apart the casings for the flight recorders, which in the 80s may not have been as robust as they are these days. I know bombs are powerful and all that, but a plane flying into a mountain, a bomb is going to destroy it. But a plane flying into a mountain is not going to destroy it? Seems a bit much. I guess bombs are quite powerful. I don't know enough about ballistics to know this, But it seems like a plane crash is going to be fairly intense. Like it's not less powerful than a bomb. But that's my theory. But why would anyone want to blow up a plane with only a few people on it? There are actually a few reasons for thinking that the plane was taken out on purpose. I've mentioned there were 19 passengers and 10 crew on the plane, but it might be helpful to go into a bit more detail as to who these people were. Of the 29 on board, there were 9 Koreans, 8 Americans, 7 Paraguayans, 5 Chileans, and 5 of the Paraguayan passengers were from the Manalone family, who had a very well-known and successful business in home appliances. One of the Americans was the aforementioned William Kelly, whose widow hiked up to the crash site to pay her respects. He was the director of the United States Peace Corps delegation to Paraguay at the time of the crash. Another American who died was Marion Davis, notably the wife of the U.S. ambassador to Paraguay. The ambassador himself was supposed to be on Flight 980, but had a life-saving last-minute change of plans. So yeah, there were people on the flight, or who were supposed to be on the flight, that could have been targets for assassination. But if you look at any flight, there's going to be someone on there. Someone's going to be like, yeah, someone could want to assassinate this guy. It's kind of weird though. You know, when you like see a plane crash and you look it up on Wikipedia and it's like notable victims or whatever. It's like the number of times there's like notable people on there. You're like, whoa, there's a lot of notable people. Let's yank another thread here and delve a bit deeper into Eastern Airlines itself. If you're not familiar with the name, it's because it dissolved in 1991. The name has apparently been brought back and relaunched in recent years, but the iteration we're talking about ended operations 20 years ago. I mean, I do feel like I've heard of Eastern Airlines, and I haven't flown on it, and I was kind of young in the 90s. I feel like it operates out of China or something. But anyways, it was a large and successful airline in its day, but it seems that its success might have also come from other more shady dealings, perhaps in caiman skins. In 1985, the same year as the Flight 980 incident, U.S. Customs busted Eastern Airlines after lots and lots of cocaine was found stuffed in suitcases flown from Colombia to Miami. They were fined $1.3 million, which is over $3 million today, which seems kind of mild for cocaine smuggling. Like, you fly that into Singapore and it's like, they hang everyone on board. According to the New York Times, in an article from September 27th, 1986, another federal official estimated that as much as 300 pounds of cocaine per week was brought into Miami in this manner over a 3-year period, and that airport crews were paid as much as $250,000 to clear each shipment. So those airport crews, oh, they're getting paid. It's insane. But how does this work? When you're like a baggage unloader and let's say you're getting 10% of that like every week, it's like $1 million a year. Who are you going to like? Ferrari. And it's like, airport baggage handling pays great. Surely that looks mad suspicious. The year following the crash, 22 Eastern Airline workers were indicted on drug smuggling charges. This didn't help Eastern's business model, which was already starting to flounder against new low-cost airlines. Add in a whopping fine of $9.5 million in safety violations in 1987, which is over $23 million today. Well, it may be a whopping fine, but 9.5 is kind of a slap on the wrist, excuse me. Because like, didn't Elon Musk get fined like $25 million for a tweet where he said he was thinking about taking Tesla private? And that was on top of another $25 million fine for Tesla or something like that. I don't remember the exact details, but it was like $50 million in fines for a tweet, $9.5 million or $23 million today for safety violations. Not exactly a big fine. Strikes in 1981, you can see why the airline bit the dust. If an airline is going bust because of a $9.5 million fine, the airline needs, to do better at business. So let's get to the drug angle. George Nolly's book posits that Eastern Airlines was actually in cahoots with then U.S. President Ronald Reagan in secretly running drugs to finance the Iran-Contra affair. That's an insane thing to say. Sometimes the conspiracy theory is real. We're not going to get into this. But this was a political scandal in the mid to late 80s involving the U.S. and supposed illegal weapons trade with Iran in order to finance the Contra group in Nicaragua. Wait, is this alleged or did this actually happen? I guess it's allegedly still a political scandal, but I don't know. Anyways, carrying on. According to Nolly, the U.S. deliberately fudged the investigation into Flight 980 to hide evidence of the ties to Reagan and the Iran-Contra mess. According to him, this then led to Eastern's ultimate demise. Is this totally unsubstantiated conspiracy theory? Yes, of course it is. But it's fun to speculate too. So let's carry on with the drug smuggling. So yeah, carrying on with the smuggling. If we're still on this deliberately destroyed tack, let's go back over what we do know. There were high-ranking people on board this plane, some of whom would have targets on their back for political or financial reasons. I mean, out of 19 passengers, 5 were part of a rich and powerful family business empire. One was the director of the Peace Corps in Paraguay, and the U.S. ambassador to Paraguay was supposed to be on there. I couldn't find out anything about the Korean passengers who made up the majority of the list, but without even taking them into account, there are a few high-profile passengers on the list. There was another incident of a bomb taking out a passenger plane in order to assassinate a Colombian presidential candidate. That happened just a few years later in 1989. And do you remember who was behind that? I do. The king of cocaine himself, Pablo Escobar. Unfortunately for Escobar and everyone else on Flight 203, his intended target, Cesar Gaviria, wasn't even on the plane. I only remember this from Narcos and a video I saw on YouTube. Mostly from Narcos, though. Is this a weird but noteworthy connection to Flight 980? I don't think Escobar had any links with Paraguay, so this is probably just stretching a tenuous coincidence. Also, no cocaine was found, or at least reported, in the wreckage of Flight 980. Although it had burst open in the snow, I guess you'd never know it was there. Yeah, I mean, it blows away in the wind of a fiery explosion. Flight 980 wasn't flying from Colombia either, so we can probably discount involvement from Escobar or any other rival cartels. They just thought it was kind of fun to add in, being that you were talking about drug smuggling and stuff. There is one smuggling element I know you're waiting for, though. What's with all the caiman skins? How many skins were possibly on this plane? So yes, we finally get to the crux of the story, the reptile skins, strewn all over the mountain. This was the 80s where it was cool to wear crocodile skin clothes or whatever, so trading this thing meant killing the ass of animals on a massive scale. Unsurprisingly, this meant that trade was eventually restricted on reptile skins, and that having a huge amount of caiman hides in the hold of Flight 980 was definitely illegal. According to a blog post by Isaac Stoner, another member of the 2016 expedition to the crash site, pieces of this skin were literally everywhere. Before identifying the animal as probably a caiman, he wrote, "Pieces of snake, alligator, crocodile skins are scattered all over the mountain. And picking up a plane part for a closer look, often there would be a crocodile hide on or near. The thought is so bizarre. They are in such abundance that we actually became quite sick of them as we combed the field for the black box." He's like, "These skins everywhere are weird. What's this? Piece of spine? Totally normal." Stoner also theorized that the huge haul of contraband might have been a factor in why the investigation ended up being less than rigorous. He wrote, quote, "These illegal skins are part of a larger pattern of smuggling illegal goods on Eastern Airlines commercial flights. Someone in the organization was making money on these sketchy practices. If some of this money found its way into the right pockets, it would be easy to delay the appropriate investigational response until many feet of snow and ice covered the crash site." Even more food for thought. As Isaac mentioned looking for the black box a minute ago, let's get back on track and try to work out what the heck happened to it. To fully understand what happened in aircraft incidents, it's important to get a hold of what's known as the black box. This, as we mentioned, is the flight data recorder that records everything going on in the plane systems. Since 1997, at least in America, flight data recorders must record at least 88 different parameters, including things like fuel flow, magnetic heading, airspeed, and control wheel position. Also coming under the black box heading is the cockpit voice recorder, which, as the name suggests, picks up and records all conversation and noise inside the cockpit. Due to the important nature of the recorders, they have crash survivable memory units, which are built to withstand crashes, pressure, and extreme heat. Also, as we mentioned before, in order that they be located easily after an accident, they are painted bright orange. They're mounted on a bright orange base. They also have underwater location beacons in case of an incident over water. In 1985, the black box would have been recording on magnetic tape, rather than the solid-state memory boards that are used nowadays. Also, even with its reputation as being able to survive a plane crash, there are instances of the flight data recorder and/or cockpit voice recorder being unusable in the aftermath of a crash. There's a Wikipedia page list of unrecovered and unusable flight recorders that Dan found out about the inaccessibility of Flight 980 and decided to try and find it. Looking at the list now, there are currently 59 entries from 1965 to present day, just in case anyone's up for an adventure. In the majority of these cases, the flight data recorders have never been found, but in a few, one or both of the recorders have been destroyed and or rendered unusable, generally in a post-crash fire. So what happened to the flight data recorder from Flight 980? There's only been a couple of black boxes that were ever destroyed. It does seem unlikely that that's what happened here. Again, several theories. The first, most obvious, it was destroyed, or at least badly damaged in the crash. Dan found parts of what was confirmed to be the outside of the black box, indicating that the outer case had at least been broken into many pieces. Was this by explosion or a result of the crash? We don't know. The tape they found and brought back was not the correct size for the tape that would be used in the recorders. So it's possible that the correct tape is still somewhere on Mount. I'm not even going to butcher that. Somewhere on the mountain. Finding pieces of brown magnetic tape that could potentially have blown anywhere is a lot harder than looking for the bright orange casing of the flight data recorder. But it's definitely not impossible that the tape is still out there. Whether it's usable if found is another question. Another theory is that the first climber up got rid of the data recorders by throwing them off the mountain or something in order to aid in the cover up of the situation. George Nolly comes back into play here, theorizing in his Final Destination book that Garage was hired by the NTSB or Eastern Airlines themselves to get rid of the evidence so as not to expose Reagan's drug running operation. This does seem increasingly unlikely. In his outside article, Peter Frickright sums this up with, quote, "It's a convoluted plot too far-fetched to take seriously, but seductive as hell to those looking to explain the inexplicable. Or, dare we say it, those looking to dead reckoning." I heard another theory from the Shocking Details podcast on this story that the design of the plane itself might be to blame. The Boeing 727 had all three engines at the rear of the plane by the tail instead of under the wing. The black box likely would have been mounted somewhere near the rear staircase, meaning that if there was an explosion, pieces from all three engines could have destroyed it. If the plane flew straight into the mountain, the recorder would likely have been in the direct path of at least one engine and could have fallen into or been smashed by the engine coming through the body of the plane. Basically, there are some good reasons for how this thing got so beaten up. And how about the last perplexing point? What happened to the people? No bodies were ever found by any of the parties venturing up the mountain. So what happened to all the people on the plane? They did find 6 small body parts which they buried and geotagged, so no bodies isn't really correct anymore. If a bomb did cause the plane to go down, the lack of bodies here makes sense, as they probably would have been ejected before the plane hit the mountain. It's kind of weird that none have been found, especially as they would have been preserved in ice and snow. But that's presuming they'd have been in one piece. There were only 29 people on the plane. So could they all have been blown to smithereens in a crash? I suppose. If an engine or two did come through the plane, there wouldn't be much left for anyone to identify. While no blood has also been part of this mystery, Fernando Garach later confirmed to Peter Frick-Wright that there had been blood at the scene. He was just too afraid of the interrogators to disagree with their narrative. I guess not a lot, though, as no one else really mentioned it. Yeah, it's also not. It's also going to go away pretty quickly and dry up and drain away. It does seem pretty. I don't know. I don't believe there's a level of conspiracy where someone's going up and disposing of bodies. I can kind of lean in a little bit to the idea that the black box was tampered with, but I am kind of leaning towards there's no conspiracy here. It's just it got destroyed. The fact that there's no bodies does kind of match up with the idea that there's no data recorder. The flight crash was just absolutely devastating, whether it's those engines coming through the plane or just a plane hitting a mountain at incredible speed. It's just a devastating crash, one that destroyed everything. Data recorder, bodies, everything. Maybe because they were looking for recognizable human bodies, everyone who'd made it up to the site overlooked the smaller pieces that Futrell and Stoner later found. There would have been so much rubble that plane parts and something like a piece of a leg would go unnoticed. And the weather at the time was bad, with avalanches hampering the initial expedition, so it's not unlikely that the human remains would have quickly been buried or covered in snow. And the caiman skins were still everywhere, though, so you might have thought that some more obvious signs of bodies would have been visible. The fact that Futrell and Stoner found anything seems to confirm that some people, at least, were still in the plane when it hit the mountain. Maybe squashing the bomb theory after all, which is kind of a shame as it tied a lot of things together for me. So here we are at the end, and what have we learned from what the 2016 expedition found? It now seems likely that the plane, for whatever reason, flew into the mountain and disintegrated. The passengers suffered a similar fate, with no trace of them left behind by the time anybody managed to get up to the wreck site. The black box was destroyed or damaged to such an extent that the tape inside came free of the casing. Whether this tape is still on the mountain and is still usable is for hardier folk than me to find out. But that's what really holds the key to this whole incident. Do we think there were nefarious goings on? The fact that Eastern Airlines was implicated in a smuggling racket and then went under a few years later definitely adds some interesting offshoots to the narrative, as well as there being several high-profile passengers on board and a lot of contraband animal skins on the flight. People have been unimpressed with the NTSB's report, saying that it didn't investigate the incident fully or properly. But I guess as we found out, there isn't much that you can do with limited communication, difficult to reach crash location, and no data recorder. The main takeaway from researching this story is that, as well as the human cost, a lot of caimans died for nothing. And also, if you happen to be going up a mountain, you must always acclimate. So there wasn't a bomb. It was just an incredibly brutal flight that destroyed everything on board and shredded a lot of caiman skins and scattered them everywhere. Anyways, this has been an episode of the Dead Reckoning Show. Maybe a more conspiracy inclined one. Let me know what you think. If you're watching on YouTube, leave me a comment below. If you're enjoying this show in its podcast form, yes, it's available there too. Why not leave a review? That's incredibly nice of you, especially if it's a good one. Thank you for listening and watching. If you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Larry M. Lease. And as always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you in our next episode. Take care.